Last time we were talking about Harappa and trade and craft specialization, and we said that there was less social stratification in Harappa than other societies, such as in Mesopotamia. Today we're going to look at a few other crafts, such as bronze work. Here we can see some examples of the kinds of tools that were made in Harappa. We could also see some of the finely decorated pottery as well. One very interesting aspect of Harappa and trade is long-distance trade with other regions, specifically areas of the Persian Gulf, as you can see here, and also Mesopotamia. There's a lot of evidence to show that these two ancient civilizations had long-distance trade with each other. One important piece of evidence are the presence of Indus beads in Mesopotamia, such as those found in the royal tombs of Ur that we looked at a few weeks ago. Remember that in the royal tombs of Ur, Queen Puabi was buried along with her retinue of female servants and soldiers. It was a mass sacrificial burials. Among the items that were found in the tomb were slender beads made out of carnelian, which is a red stone you can see here. The beads that were found in the royal tombs of Ur came from the civilization of Harappa. Another piece of evidence are seals that are found in what's now Arabia in the Persian Gulf that show Indian elephants on them. A final piece of evidence for trade between the Indus civilization and Mesopotamia is a cylinder seal that was owned by a man from the Indus living in Mesopotamia and doing business in Mesopotamia. The cylinder seal has his name on it and also describes him as being from Meluha. Meluha is most likely the ancient name for the Indus. If we look at other types of evidence, we can see that this round clay ceiling has two different seals on it. The first seal is of an eagle. That is a design that's found in Central Asia. The other side of the very same object depicts an elephant, the kind of which we see in South Asia or India. The fact that this seal had stamps from two different regions suggests that it was some sort of passport or trading document and supports the idea of trade between the Indus and this region. Among the burials in Harappa, we can see individuals buried with pottery and also with jewelry, but there does not seem to be a high degree of social stratification between people. Here we can see a female burial with a young child here and some pottery buried with them. Let's take a look at the religion of the Indus and what the evidence tells us about the ancient religion of the people of Harappa. One of the things archaeologists find are female figurines. One of them you can see here is giving a stance of prayer, or is in a prayer stance with her hands up near her face. From seals, a common motif that we see is that of a male horned deity. This is a common motif, and as we said before, female figurines may symbolize female fertility, and bulls or deities with the horns of bulls may depict male fertility. When you look at this seated male, you notice that the soles of his feet are touching and his hands are resting on his knees. This is a very typical pose found in yoga today and is called the lotus position. Yoga originates from India. Many seals depict animals and show them outdoors in front of incense burners or other ritual objects. We also see seals that depict dancers engaged in a ritual and what looks like some sort of ceremony with nature depicted. And so some people think that a lot of aspects of Harappan religion revolved around nature and involved rituals that took place outside. This is another depiction of the male horned deity that we talked about earlier. And again, some more examples of female figurines. You can see wearing decorated headdresses and, of course, the bangles on the arm. That is a common thing found in Harappa. This is a clay depiction of an elephant, and here you can see some more seals. Many of the seals depict a unicorn on them, and you can also see a zebu here and a rhinoceros. There's been some controversy surrounding the use of seals, and one interpretation is that the animals on the seals represent different groups, such as kin groups or craft guilds, or another type of group that made decisions within the society. When we look at how Harappa was organized, we can see there's a lot of evidence to show that this was a very organized society. They had a sewer system, writing, craft specialization, standardized weights and measures, town planning. All of these suggest there was organization and leadership within the society. However, when compared to Mesopotamia and Egypt, there are many things that are missing. If you compare Mesopotamia and Egypt to the Indus, you'll see there are several things that exist in both Egypt and Mesopotamia that are completely absent in the Indus, or seem to be completely absent. So why don't you pause the video at this time and write down 2 or 3 or more things that we saw in Egypt and Mesopotamia that we have not talked about at all in the Indus. When you have a couple of these, resume the video and we'll discuss them. Okay, so hopefully you're able to think of a couple, but let's take a look at a few. When we looked at Mesopotamia and Egypt, one of the things that we talked about were very, very large temples. We saw ziggurats of Mesopotamia. We saw large temples in Egypt, like the type that Ramses II built. No temples like those exist in the Indus. We have a center of the city of Mohenjo-Daro with a great bath, but nothing like a temple. Another thing that's missing are royal tombs. We saw the royal tombs of Ur in Mesopotamia. We saw the tombs of King Tut in Egypt. Another aspect that we find in Mesopotamia and Egypt that seems to be absent in the Indus is large-scale warfare. There is very little evidence for the kind of pervasive warfare that we saw in Mesopotamia and also in Egypt. A final aspect that seems to be missing are statues of kings or important leaders. Again, in Mesopotamia and Egypt, we have evidence of enormous power held in the hands of a few people, what we would call, again, political centralization. In the Indus, we don't have anything like that. In fact, one of the few depictions of what is probably a leader is a small statue that you can see here. It's probably some sort of priest or king or priest-king, but it's relatively small and nothing like what we saw in Egypt, the temple of Abu Simbel of Ramses II, which contained enormous statues of Ramses at the entrance. So this leads to the question, how was Harappa civilization organized? Who were the leaders? Who made the decisions? If there's evidence that Harappa was organized, and we said from the Great Plan of the cities and sewer systems there is evidence of that, then who made the decisions regarding them? Some people believed that there existed an organization where the civilization was controlled not by one royal family or one king, but by groups of individuals, right? Like we talked about before. Different groups would make decisions on different aspects of the society, so it was less hierarchical and less politically centralized than Mesopotamia or Egypt. Another idea is that there may have been a kind of ideology of egalitarianism, or an egalitarian ideology, in which people downplayed differences between them rather than highlighting the differences through things such as royal tombs. So Harappa was probably organized in a very different way than Mesopotamia or Egypt. It was probably controlled by different groups, and there probably was an ideology that promoted egalitarianism. So if you study Mesopotamia and you also study Egypt, you might believe that warfare is inevitable. You may also believe that a strong authoritarian ruler, such as a king, would be an inevitable consequence of a civilization. Harappa shows us that these things are not inevitable. We're going to learn about the collapse of Harappa through a group presentation the last week of class, so I won't go into that right now. But I do want to mention the different reasons to explain why the state emerged in Harappa in the first place. For the most part, we can toss out the irrigation hypothesis, and we can also toss out Kainero's hypothesis concerning warfare to explain the rise of the state in the Indus. In general, the best explanation for the rise of the state is the existence of important trade networks along the Indus River and tributaries that connected different communities together. Trade probably promoted organization. It also promoted people living in larger and larger communities, which would have access to economic opportunities and also trade goods. This ends the section for the third quiz. The third quiz will cover Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Indus. For each of these civilizations, please understand the reasons why they developed, the evidence for them being complex at certain periods in their history, and the way that these civilizations changed over time, as well as aspects of these civilizations that make them unique or that help differentiate them from other civilizations. For example, a civilization where the king was also considered to be a god is an important aspect of Egyptian civilization that's not found in Mesopotamia or the Indus. With Mesopotamia, we saw the development of a chiefdom in the Ubaid period, the development of a state during the Uruk period, the growth of city-states during the early dynastic, and then finally empire in the Akkadian period. For all these civilizations, in general, what we see over time is them becoming larger, more populous, and more complex. In Egypt, we saw that the pre-dynastic had many elements of the Egyptian state in place even before the emergence of the state. So the pre-dynastic was a chiefdom, but had many important aspects that were hallmarks of Egyptian civilization later. During the Old Kingdom, we saw the emergence of the pyramids. In the Middle Kingdom, we saw a dramatic collapse at the end of that period due to an invasion from the outside. These people were known as the Hyksos. And then in the New Kingdom, Egypt created a vast empire. In the Indus civilization, we saw a very closely connected series of sites, the largest ancient civilization in the world, and the development of trade and craft specialization.